Afghanistan has come a long way from 2001, from the almost pre-modern days of the Taliban, but it's cost hundreds of billions of dollars and tens of thousands killed and injured. And as the Afghans argue with Americans about a bilateral security agreement to define post-war relations, its president continues to be an ally one day and an opponent the next. Hamid Karzai has had very troubled relationships with his Western backers. Whether fighting the Taliban or nation building, he's often had very different objectives. Now there's only 6 months left until elections for his successor. So what does he really think about the United States, the Taliban, of Britain's war in Helmand? Is he at all bothered by the enormous levels of corruption here, or by women's rights? In one of his last major interviews as president, Hamid Karzai has agreed to speak to Newsnight. There's no doubt that the country has grown, developed and come a long way in the last 12 years. Why then do the Americans, President Obama, call you an unreliable, ineffective partner?
Because where they want us to go along, we don't go along. They want us to keep silent when civilians are killed. We will not, we cannot.
Isn't it the case that your relationship with President Bush was better than your relationship with Obama, because his main focus has been the exit strategy? How has that been for you?
I had a very good relationship with President Bush, and those beginning years, there was not much difference of opinion between us. The worsening of relations began actually in 2005, where we saw the first incidents of civilian casualties, where we saw that the war on terror was not conducted where it should have been, which was in the sanctuaries, in the training grounds beyond Afghanistan. Rather than that, the US and NATO forces were conducting operations in Afghan villages, causing harm to the Afghan people.
Are you talking to the Taliban yourself personally?
Yes, we are. Yes, we are. We have our whole system engaged in several directions to bring stability and peace to Afghanistan.
Is the goal to bring them into some kind of power-sharing deal in government?
Absolutely. There are Afghans where the Afghan president, where the Afghan government can appoint the Taliban to a government job. They're welcome, we will do that. But where it's the Afghan people appointing people through elections to state organs, then the Taliban should come and participate in elections. So to clarify this, yes, as Afghans, they are welcome to the Afghan government, like all other Afghans. Yes, as Afghans, they are welcome to participate in elections as all other Afghans.
A British audience or an American audience watching this would wonder, what was all this for then? 12 years of fighting, lives lost, and the Taliban would just walk back in and be part of government?
Well, the Americans have told us themselves in Washington, in my last visit, that the Taliban are not their enemies, that they will not fight the Taliban anymore.
What are you discussing at the moment with the Taliban? I mean, what's up for negotiation? What's at stake?
If the Taliban have reasons for which they cannot come, they must spell this out. If it is the Afghan constitution, they must come up and talk to us, and then allow the Afghan people, and through the mechanisms that we have, to amend the constitution.
The gains that women have made in this country are tenuous. Surely by bringing the Taliban back, you're compromising those gains.
The return of the Taliban will not undermine the progress. This country needs to have peace.
But you know where they stand with women's rights. I mean, are you willing to sacrifice women's rights?
I'm willing to stand for anything that would bring peace to Afghanistan, and through that to promote the cause of the Afghan women better.
So if the
there
Taliban...
is no doubt about that. Even if the Taliban come, that will not end, that will not slow down.
So women in Afghanistan should not have the fear of a return of the
None
Taliban?
At all. None.
The bilateral security agreement, Mr. President, let's talk about that. That defines the US and Afghanistan's relationship beyond withdrawal. And if you push too hard, they may not stay. Is that something that worries you?
Well, if the agreement doesn't suit us, then of course they can leave. The agreement has to suit Afghanistan's interests and purposes. If it doesn't suit us, and if it doesn't suit them, then naturally we will go separate ways.
You may not sign this bilateral security agreement.
If this agreement does not provide Afghanistan peace and security, the Afghans will not want it. That's very clear.
Britain has made a massive contribution already. Can you tell the British public, you know, what all their sacrifices were for? Because they don't understand why they're still here.
All the prime ministers that came, were in office in the past 12 years, have clearly stated that they are here in Afghanistan in order to provide security to the West, in order to prevent terrorism from reaching the West, in order to fight extremism here. How much of that has been achieved is a question that the British government can answer it alone.
Could you assess for me the criticism and failings that were experienced in Helmand?
It's not only Britain. On security front, the entire NATO exercise was one that caused Afghanistan a lot of suffering and a lot of loss of life, and no gains because the country is not secure. I'm not happy to say that, well, there is partial security. That's not what we are seeking. What we wanted was absolute security and a clear-cut war against terrorism.
Let's go back to your legacy. Some people would say that your legacy here in office has been tainted by the corruption in this country, that Afghanistan is the third most corrupt country in the world. Is that a legacy you want to leave behind?
No, not at all. Of course not. Our government is weak and ineffective in comparison to other governments. We've just begun. But the big corruption, the hundreds of millions of dollars of corruption, it was not Afghan. Now everybody knows that. It was foreign, the contracts, the subcontracts, the blind contracts given to people, money thrown around to buy loyalties, money thrown around to buy submissiveness of Afghan government officials to policies and designs that the Afghans would have not agreed to. That was the major part of corruption.
And finally, there isn't a single living Afghan leader. They've all been killed in a very violent way. Are you concerned about your safety when you leave office?
Not at all, no. I'll be safe.
President Karzai, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.